So for the horns, we might make some modifications. You can see these have a base to it, and I kind of like that. Outside of that, the horns are metal, so they'll use a similar treatment. So let's explore how we could get that base out of here. You know, what's going to be our approach. The first approach is to basically divide these so we have enough polygons to do something with. That's going to be step one. And I'll go ahead and just divide this pretty high, you know, 1.6 million. That's not a lot. Then we can determine what angle we want to do these from. Front to back looks okay. And there's a number of ways we can do this. A very simple way we can do this is with the inflate. So what I'm going to do is switch over here to something like the mask lasso. I can find the length I want to go to and then just kind of create a straight line to the other side. And this should be somewhat equal across the horns with how I've done them. I forgot to turn on symmetry, so turn on symmetry before you do any of that. Let's get that in place now. So something like that will be the equivalent of where I'm going to flare these out from. You can Control-Alt-Tap to sharpen that mask, and then you can Control-Click to inverse. And then down here under deformation, we have the option here to inflate. And if I go ahead and just set that to 1, what it will do is it will go ahead and push those out. Now that didn't push it out very much. We could increase this to maybe like 10, and you can see the effect that has. Now, 10 is probably too much for what I want, so let's go ahead and do a happy medium on the inflate here, and maybe do something like 5, and that looks pretty good for what I'm aiming for. Now, this is not really going to work very well because of how everything's interacting and whatnot, so how do I make this better? I could come under my layers now, not my layers, excuse me, my geometry. We could delete lower to just get rid of everything, and then we could just dynamesh this. So we could go maybe try 2048. Right now it's at 1.6. You can see 2048 is way too high. These are very small, so let me try 1024. Okay, well that's interesting. That's substantially smaller than 2048. I must have missed something on the Dynamesh there. Okay, I definitely did. I don't know why that jumped to 6 million. Let me set that to 4096 there, and it'll go to 8.5. And that should be doable. So what that's going to do is just make sure that this has the geometry we need for detailing, and we're probably good at that. These are pretty small, like I mentioned. They are a headpiece, though, so if we wanted more detail, we could divide these. Remember, at 800 points, it's only 400 per. So with that in place, we can just add a layer here now, and we can go through and we can do our treatment of metals. So I'll start with the BCB for the clay buildup, just like we did with the previous metals, and we'll go ahead and give some directionality to this. Now, one of the differences I'll do for the horn, though, is rather than running at a random angle, I'm going to follow this downward like this to kind of help facilitate the horn look. And I'll also consider doing my flattening in a similar way. Now, I don't want these lines to be perfectly straight. I want them to have some crisscross to them. But the idea is thinking about how this would be, created. How are we going to create a metal horn? And it's probably going to be through some sort of a spinning option, some sort of a lathe technique where, we're going around and around and around in a circle to kind of create this rounded surface. And this is kind of simulating the tool scratches. The other thing, too, is it's hard to say how successful this technique's going to be at maintaining the shape of this. The other thing is I am doing this on the highest level. I probably shouldn't. So let me go ahead and come in here and just restart this. Usually you want to preserve that top layer here for finishing where possible. We haven't quite stuck to that all the time here, but in this instance, I'm going to try to. And I'm going to go a little bit bigger with my brush here, too, to kind of speed this along. I also might do this a segment at a time to speed this along. Kind of just depends, but that was a lot faster than going in circles a whole bunch, so I think we'll finish a bit quicker if I just go this route instead of spinning it constantly. So back and smarter than before. Yay. All right. And remember to do some positive, some negative. I have my finger on Alt and I'm just kind of lifting every now and then. So that way we're getting a variety here in terms of the shape. And I'm still trying to follow that curvature there. as much as possible to maintain the variety there and the directionality we want to simulate. All right, on this part, I'll do something similar. I'll go ahead and make my brush smaller, but we're going to run along this direction. And I don't really need to do the bottom, so I'm not going to. This is one of those pieces we'll never see the interior of. And I say that, but, you know, sometimes you do run into this situation where it's like, oh, let's have a bunch of, like, horn pieces in the corner of the blacksmith shop so they can see how these are built. And then you're just like, darn it, I should have added that detail. It happens sometimes. Okay. With this in place, I'm just going to do this on the same layer. BFA, we're going to go to the flatten tool and just come in here and get our tight little circles and go to town on this. Banging this up to make it look like our metal texture that we've been using across the various surfaces here, and to give some of this grit here. So when we apply our metal in something like substance, it has some edges and other information to catch on for color variance and detail variance. For this one, I'm kind of working a chunk at a time here. This is one of those things where I may need to change the scale of the brush as I get towards the tip. So it's good to kind of work big to small in these situations. So I'm going to start with the girthiest part of the horn here and then work my way upwards to the remainder. And I'll go ahead and do some time-lapse stuff here so you don't have to see me go in circles a million times. At this point, we've seen this technique, you know, a dozen times. You're probably fairly comfortable with the idea of going in circles with the flat brush to create a metal effect. And here I'm going to make my brush smaller and kind of work this tip here. Nice little hot tip if you weren't aware, if you're new to ZBrush at all. You can press the F key to focus. I don't think I've talked about that at all. Like I mentioned, this isn't a software tutorial, it's a process tutorial. So I'm assuming you have a base knowledge of ZBrush. If you want a better knowledge, feel free to take my sculpting course on Udemy, and where I go through basically the basic tools I use for sculpting. All right, so I'm going to work my way down here to this area. Remember, I'm going to try and avoid the edges because I want to do the edges separately. That way I have control over them. The one thing that's challenging with this one is it does have that soft edge that I'm going to have to contend with. And I do need to figure out how that's interacting overall with the helmet here. It does look like it has a factor, so when I go to adjust that, I may have to kind of dial things in and make sense of them. The alternative is I could just kind of softly roll this into here, which might be the better approach. And taking a look at that, I think I will. Just kind of moving forward here, I'll roll this in with this. Since it doesn't have a hard edge, it doesn't really need a bevel. It's more of a hammered surface. The other edge, on the other hand, that is hard and needs bevel. Now, this is similar to the foot detail on the heel, right? We added in that little heel, and it's not part of the concept, but it's one of those things that structurally makes sense. And every now and then you do have to do that with characters and any 3D art. Concept artists, especially ones that are using drawings, do tend to miss things, or you need to adapt them to work in 3D. And that's something that happens a lot with cartoony translations. You know, it works in 2D, but you try and bring it over to 3D and it's just not going to work. It needs something else. All right, cool. That's looking pretty awesome. The metals are looking consistent. Let's get that final little edge in here. I'm going to come in here and bump that up. Go into my layers here. Add ourselves a fresh one. Solo these horns and hammer these down. Now, I've probably mentioned this by this point, but you do want to be a little bit more diligent with naming your layers, especially if you're in a workplace. These documents can be handed off, not to mention very common practice nowadays is to lay off US-based artists and hire overseas for cheaper. So if you're in the US, you know, consider that. I don't know if you guys have the same problem over in other countries, but it's becoming very common in the US lately. So the main thing is you might be working on this one day and then someone else is working on it the next. So I suggest playing nice and naming your layers. If you don't care about making enemies, by all means, do what I'm doing. I do a lot of solo art and contract work and am an army of one, and that is exactly why I am out of the habit of naming these things every now and then. But with that said, when I do get into the workplace, I kind of shift gears and I do name things. Now, I might try another pass here with some large hammering really quick. These small hammers, they don't quite have the same level of appeal as I want on these horns. I think I can leave it the way it is for the base, but I just feel like getting some larger shapes in here are going to read nicer on this area for whatever reason. Now, I did do this as a layer, so if I'm like, wow, I was totally wrong, I can just turn this off, which is great. I might come in here and just kind of give these more directionality with these larger hammerings. I have to be careful here that I don't lose my silhouette, because the flat brush can be pretty strong on these thin areas. Let's play around with this. And, maybe even doing some more directionality type stuff on this is good, but something like that, I feel like those large chunky shapes give it a bit more character. And that's looking pretty cool. All right. So that gives us our horns as a sort of metallic finish, gives them a little bit of ding up, a little bit of character there, so they look like the rest of our metals. The last thing we need to do for the character itself is just kind of combine the head and the neck. So let's get that in there, and then we can move on to the next stages. So the head and the neck are going to be some of our easiest parts, simply because they're ambiguous and don't really need any work. So I'm going to take the head here and just kind of bring it out of the stack here, down to where my little arm is, little head area here. And I can go ahead and toggle the visibility of the body if I want. I may take this piece here, my shirt, and just move it into this group. That way when I turn this off, we just see these. Looks funny with just the shirt. All right, so the head here is, like I mentioned, it's ambiguous. We could try dividing this to see if it gives us an okay look. And we just have to decide if we want a chin to be soft or not. And quite frankly, I think the answer is yes. We probably do. Something like that's fine. Remember, this is just going to be black. We're not going to do any sort of detailing. So to make these cohesive, what I might play around with is how it's fitting in the helm. Does it need that wide area? And it kind of does. The next question I need to ask is, like, do I want it to actually have a head shape, which is kind of interesting. If I did, it'd be a matter of coming down here to this base area, and instead of having this be super hard like this in this base here, I could just kind of smooth that. And then as we go up, I could continue to kind of smooth this and repeat the process so that instead of filling that in, it kind of more gradually comes down. And I guess that's okay. We don't really see it, so I'm not worried. But I also might want to connect it into the neck a little bit more properly. So let's talk about that and, the next stages. Basically what we do is we can just come into the geometry on this one, make sure it doesn't have any layers, come into this one, just delete lower. We can take these two, one on top of the other, and just merge down. So we can just do a merge down here, hit OK. And to combine these, you can use Dynamesh. And what Dynamesh will do is it will boolean these together. So we can come into Dynamesh, just set this to a high number like 2048, and just control drag. And since I already had Dynamesh on one, these should be one now. And these are now combined. So they should be a singular piece. I could go lower on this, probably like 256. Let's try that and just see. And you can see it kind of makes this a little bit cruder. But with that in there, we could sculpt across this even to make this actually feel like a neck that connects into the back of the head. If I do, though, I do need to be cautious that I pay attention to how this is looking on the body. You can see that's not exactly what we would want to do. So that's okay, though. Maybe I do it here a bit more and just kind of gradually connect this in. I could also consider, cutting back the head a bit so we get something that feels a bit more natural here in terms of how the neck is interacting with it. Like I mentioned, not a big deal because we don't really see these things, but it will make it so on the backside, we get a little bit more helmet, which I don't oppose to. The cool thing is this kind of comes forward like a jawline, so I have no issue, kind of making that a jawline. And just remember, this is all going to be black at the end of the day, so it's really about the negative space we're seeing, more so than the positive space or the details. I can take a similar approach with the neck here, making it connect into the head correctly, maybe making this area slope a little bit less to make room for the other details. Maybe we have a little bit of a jugular or something here. Get some sense of anatomy in terms of directionality, but don't go super anatomical. Just kind of get some nice soft forms and just come in here and aggressively smooth things. I do kind of want this area to be filled in here, but that doesn't necessarily mean we need to have this gnarly jawline. So we mainly need that to be the chin, but there's no reason I couldn't come in here and give this kind of a more natural jawline feel. Even with the chin, nothing says I need to have a perfect square. Since this is going to be black, maybe I round that out a little bit and make something a little bit more natural. I do want to keep the head flat. I don't want to have any indication of eyes or anything in there for my style. You could even go as far as to sculpt a little head in here if you didn't want to have a character with a dark face. The reason why I've chose this design is to avoid the need to worry about what the head looks like or facial rigging, because a lot of video games we don't bother with that. But if you're a more advanced student, then maybe you could consider those in your design. But there we go. I think something like that looks kind of nice. I might give it a few more divisions just to make it work so we don't have any weird faceting. And with that, our character is complete. We now have a high poly character that we can use for our detail projections in our game mesh. I'd only want to clean up some areas here. I think on the shirt still, if I come in here, I'm going to alt-click the shirt so it's my active layer, and just kind of add in another layer. I'm not quite liking this interaction, so I might use something like the move brush here to just kind of nudge this. That's interesting. Let me check the surface here. You know what? I might leave it be. Okay. And I could just pull that in slightly. That would also solve the issue. Just kind of tuck that a little bit more so it's not competing as much. All right. But I'd want to do a little bit more analyzing on that, maybe even throw it into perspective mode here and create a quick render. Just to double check, make sure nothing looks off, feels off, any of that kind of stuff. And if it's good, probably wrap things up there for this pass. And like I mentioned, we still have some other high poly stuff to do, but as far as our high poly character goes with detailing, I think this is a pretty good first pass to head into our game with. All right, so make sure you save your progress, always good, and then we can go ahead and take a look at what's next. Be sure to like and subscribe so you can catch the next video in the series when it goes live.